with a user experience perspective. Krzysztof Kania is sociologist and yet another associate director at iSquare. With 15 years of experience in UX design and research, Krzysztof is focusing on bringing advanced tech-based research technologies and methodologies to Poland, Czechia, Slovakia, and Hungary, and also develop market research for gaming. In today's topic, he'll dive deep into the world of computer games, which have been around for over 50 years now. But funny enough, we are still considering that to be the future for advertising. Krzysztof will elaborate why they are still considered the future of ads and how difficult the road to get there is going to be. Please welcome me, Krzysztof, with Forget the Metaverse, Games Are the Future for Advertising.
Thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. And I would like to extend my thanks specifically to Justyna Belz today, who has put together most of this event, and we've been working for a while together so that we can all meet here today. But aside from the conference here and the organizational aspects, I would like to get going with the topic of my presentation today, and the title, Forget the Metaverse, Gaming is the Next Frontier for Advertising. And I'm pointing out the title because I've arrived at the title first, and then I started putting together the presentation. I'm sure this is how most great works of art are created. I'm sure Lord of the Rings was created first, the title, and then fill in the blanks. And I'm sure Iliad and Odyssey and all of these things were created that way. So I had these fantastic ideas for the topic because these are the headlines that I saw, especially in the past few months pertaining to the Metaverse, to Mark Zuckerberg and his plans for the future. And it all sounded quite similar to other things I've already heard in the past because I'm an avid gamer, and what Mark was saying about the future sounded somewhat familiar, and I started doubting myself. I started working on this title, and I started inserting question marks. Forget the Metaverse? Gaming is the next frontier for advertising, exclamation mark. Or forget the Metaverse, gaming is the next frontier for advertising? Those various problems that I went through. And then I had to stop. And I had to procrastinate a little bit, because computer games help you relax, they increase your creativity, and these are the games that helped bring this presentation forth, because instead of spending a lot of time working on it and researching, I was procrastinating, and I played some truck games, moving wood in Alaska, and I built civilizations, I've explored virtual worlds, I raced quite a bit, I've explored the dystopian future, and I conquered Europe in the meantime. And this allowed me to... Thank you very much. It was hard work. And this allowed me to stop and take stock of the problem. Because when we look at this topic again, we have to think what happened. And 10 months ago, Mark Zuckerberg said, the metaverse is where the physical and digital worlds come together, a space where digital representations, avatars, interact, work, and play. Well, that sounds very much like a computer game and virtual worlds that have been around for a while already. And actually, I started thinking, where did I hear all of this? Where Sony created Rec Room, which is exactly what Mark describes. And this was a few years ago already. And Steam VR. Steam is the biggest gaming software platform in the world, an e-commerce platform. They have their own VR system with avatars where you can purchase things with their own currency. And then there are all these other ones, including Mark Zuckerberg's very own Oculus Home, which also already does what Metaverse is meant to do in the future. So Mark doesn't do anything by accident, I'm sure. He's a very shrewd and calculated player. So I started thinking a little bit more. What is this about? Because when we think about the non-virtual aspect of it, it goes even deeper. The virtual worlds in which players exist have been around for a longer amount of time. We had Nintendo's Miiverse, which, even though it has already managed to close down because it was so long ago, it still has like 50 unofficial clones where people still play unofficially with Nintendo avatars. Remember Second Life? That was 20 years ago. Roblox, this is happening now. This is the biggest environment where you can exist, but you can also play games within Roblox. You can build your own computer games within Roblox. But you can also just exist in that world as any character you want. Minecraft. I want to say it's around 15 years at this point. And of course Fortnite, which started out as a perfectly average game, shooter game, and it grew into another virtual world where you can basically not even, it's the funny part, you don't actually need to shoot anyone anymore. You can just use Fortnite as an experience for yourself. And thinking more, putting myself into Mark's shoes, I thought about the current situation in the gaming industry. 3 billion people at the moment identified as actively playing computer games. So almost half of the world population. And that on top of that, 5 billion internet users. 77% of millennials and 81% of Gen Z playing regularly. And that's a keyword, regularly. That's a lot of time. The gender split used to be that it was very different, but the metric of women players as to male players keeps getting closer and closer. And then the new thing that's happening, mobile gaming, is becoming increasingly popular, and it's dethroning PC games, consoles. 90% of people playing games, at least in the US, consider it a positive experience. So you are getting positive stuff. Remember what I said about procrastination earlier? That helped. And that was a positive experience for me. 5 to 7 hours per week. So we are encroaching with gaming on other activities. People perhaps do other things less. Probably exercise less, unfortunately. But also listen to music less, enjoy art less, read less. But nonetheless, we know where they are, we know where to find them. And then currently $200 billion, more or less, is an estimate how much this whole industry is worth. So I would say, certainly worth looking into for the future if you're thinking what to do with your gigantic stash of money you've earned. But then there's the second part of the presentation, a term that keeps coming up. Games, the new frontier for advertising. And you think, how is the new frontier? It's been around for 50 years. And I remember talking about advertising in games 25 years ago when I was a kid. And we wanted ads in games then because we thought it actually enhances the experience. It was crazy when you think about it from today's perspective. But this is the same thing as with evening cartoons. If you were a kid in 1989 in Poland and you watched Notanocka, which was basically a cartoon show, there were no advertisements during it. And when they finally appeared and there was one advertisement, you thought, that's amazing. This is as good as the cartoon. I want to see more advertisements. And it's, from the perspective of time, it's insane because who would want now to have more ads? But this is how we thought about advertisements in the 90s, and the experience wasn't full in a virtual world back then because it didn't really have ads. The games themselves, you know, you can go back as far as 1947. We're just using rudimentary technology, a cathode-ray tube. Already people created basic games. And then basically in the early 70s is when we started having first easily accessible games, both in gaming arcades and at home. The first home console came out in 1972. The arcades, they were an extension of already existing mechanical arcades. You had pinball parlors, and they slowly started introducing screens and digital elements. And Pong was one of the games that you could just basically throw the ball around back and forth. You could do it on the home console, or you could pay money at the arcade to do it. And the first in-game ad appeared in 1978 in a text game, and it asked you to, basically told you to buy the next game. And this was about as much as could have been achieved back then, because you could not draw anything with the basic graphics. So you could only use text to advertise it. So it still wasn't a medium where you could do pretty much anything. And my favorite thing is the first game market crash happened in 1983. So the market was already so huge by 1982 that it managed to basically break underneath its own weight and went down $42 billion, which was a huge amount of money in 1983. And the reason for that was games were very bad. They were really awful. I don't know if you managed to play games from this time. E.T. was it's considered the worst game ever. And actually, people say that it caused the most of the market damage at that time. And then Nintendo came along, and they did a bunch of things well. This is the first organization that actually thought about branding, it thought about merchandising. They introduced a seal of quality for their games, which is something that didn't exist. This is why Atari games before were so bad, because nobody looked at the quality of it. And Nintendo, up until today, when it comes to games, is absolutely the best in terms of knowledge of advertising, of how they're doing it, and not sharing this knowledge with anyone. They've been at it for the past, well, Nintendo was created at the end of the 19th century, actually, so they've been at it for 120 years, but they've been creating games also since the 70s, essentially. And once they get a hit, they will sell you everything. Morning cartoons, movies, soda drinks, comic books, accessories for your Nintendo. They'll advertise everywhere. You will not run away from Nintendo. And then in the 90s, we started seeing some first examples of in-game advertising. This dream that I remember having of, and to be perfectly honest, it was bad. You know, you couldn't do much. This is what could be achieved with the graphics in the mid-90s. Sports games looked like this, maybe 7-Up. There were some games specifically released by companies to advertise their brands, but they were very bad. There wasn't any interest. And then in the aughts, something happened. This is a graph that shows you the amount of money spent on in-game advertising. And it starts off with around $30 million in 2004, which doesn't even register. And then it keeps growing and growing, exponentially growing, to the point where it's estimated to be around $7 billion right now. So what happened? Why did this happen? Quite simply, technology happened. In the 90s, as I showed you, you couldn't really do a good ad in a game because it would be low quality. The graphics, the resolutions were too low. 3D graphics weren't able to deliver the quality of image that you would require. So you can see on the evolution of a 3D engine what happened between 94 and 2004. How the 3D rendering came forward, how the processing power allowed you to show more colors, more detail, and how we are still continuing on this path. And again, you can see this on the car game. Back in '94, Need for Speed had to pair with a magazine called Road and Track, because otherwise a game developer would never be allowed to use a real car in a game. There was zero interest from car manufacturers. Today, car manufacturers are paying a lot of money to game developers to have their cars appear in the game. And then sports games. This is the grandfather of advertising in games, and it continues to be the best place to advertise. As you can see, back in '93, we already had ads in those games, but thanks to the increased fidelity of graphics, you could not only see the brands at the side of the stadium, but you can see them on clothing, even on the ball itself, even on distant elements of the stadiums. And this is the classic idea of in-game advertising. This is what we always thought this is going to be. Billboards, essentially, that exist in a virtual world, but they are representations of billboards that we know from the real world. So we thought, being iSquare and specializing in what we specialize in, how about we run our own test and see how an ad can perform in a modern game. And we chose one of the games that are currently very well known. It's a Polish game. It's a game based on a franchise set in a dystopian future, but it's also based in a city in that future that has a lot of ads in it. And we basically used eye tracking and surveys and monitoring of our players following our model that was already described earlier today, starting from perception through explicit methodologies to implicit. We've put together an experience and we monitored this experience on all the aspects, and we looked at prior things iSquare has done in those terms. We chose Night City, as I mentioned, as a test subject, which is a fully fledged virtual city with lots of ads, with people, with traffic. But we thought we want to inject some real world content into that city, not hypothetical ads that don't exist. So we chose something that our test subjects would recognize from every day. So this is an ongoing campaign from Technical Krankenkasse in Germany. We took those ads, and then we took Coca-Cola, which is a super recognizable brand, and we wanted to see how people would react to seeing those ads in a place that they don't expect them to see in their entertainment directly. Just a quick movie for you. This is the experience that players had. We set them loose in the virtual city. We told them to follow the path, although they were free to deviate from it. And we injected those ads into the city. And we monitored their attention. We measured everything. We were checking how long they looked at those ads. And of course, in this particular case, this person's paying a lot of attention. This did not always happen. In some cases, people would just play as they would and not actually even notice it. But many did. So to put it in context, our studies, more than 320 of them, lots of participants, eye tracking data from 57 studies, and lots of stimuli arrived at these findings that basically said that there's a short amount of time, a measurable amount of time when we can have an attention, your attention, that we need to be attentive, that we need to grab this attention and use and make the best of it, and that basically in media, after 2.5 seconds, the attention starts dropping. So you have 2.5 seconds to really get your message across. And this time is even shorter in other methods. So where would we land with games? We actually, while not directly comparable, we ended up at 3.5 seconds. Looking at the Coca-Cola ads in 3.4 seconds. And when you take into account how much these ads were seen by people, it comes out that Coca-Cola, with their simple creations, with the logos, with the recognizable campaigns, was more effective than Technical Krankenkasse, which had a campaign that was a little bit more difficult to visually identify, to quickly see what it was. But nonetheless, even Techniker's campaign managed a score of 2.8%, and it had a similar attention span over 3 seconds, which we consider a surprisingly good result considering. From this, we know that even in busy environments, people pay attention to ads in games. They just notice them. We know that the rules that ads need to follow in the real world needs to be also followed in the game. Because one of the rules of effective advertising in games is repeatability and mimicking reality. And that's why sports games are so good. Because in a sports game, you basically always have a soccer pitch or a tennis stadium. It's always the same field. And then it mimics reality, it mimics something that you know. Conversely, if you hate advertisements in the real world, you will also hate them in the virtual world. And if you're ambivalent about them, you'll be ambivalent. And this also carries over. We had success in participants recalling the brands, and we also checked if maybe they think that they recall the brands, but they actually don't recall them. And the surprising finding here was that no, that actually the only thing that some people misidentified were the cars, because it's a street and there are lots of virtual cars driving around, and they thought that maybe some Japanese car companies are advertising their cars. Other than that, they identified Coca-Cola and Technical Krankenkasse. Interestingly enough, 30 of the 20 people, 13 were negative when asked how they feel about this. 5 were positive and 6 ambivalent. However, when you look at the comments, this doesn't necessarily carry over, because most of the comments were actually fairly positive about the experience. It's more appealing to me when the brands are real. It's important that they don't distract you, and they need to be a part of the experience, but generally it makes it more interesting and more realistic. I don't find it annoying as long as it's not obtrusive. So these are fairly positive statements. I think we only had one, but somebody was quite angry with us. But out of 20 people, this was only one person, which I thought that, and people were very verbose also about it. We had some people really tell us, share their feelings, which was a lot about how they feel about ads. So this is something that people think about. I don't want to be manipulated by advertising when I'm gaming. This is me time, relaxation. Maybe if I get the game for free, I am more likely to accept those ads. Maybe not when I'm paying for it. We expected those statements. But generally, other than this one person who was very unhappy, we did not find that much negative feedback. So, in closing, that type of ad in a game is not very popular. We thought in the 90s that in the future, every game is going to be full of billboards, like I showed you with those pictures with cars. This didn't really happen. And there's a reason for it. Every game is a unique coding environment. We found this preparing for this test because we had to hack this game to do what we wanted to do. And when you want to put your ads in a game takes 4 to 6 years to be created. So you need to know that 6 years from now, you will have a campaign that you will want to put into a game, and this game will actively exist for 6 months. Is it worth it? Probably not. It's impossible to standardize user paths in those games, except sports games, again, which are super effective at advertising. But in Cyberpunk, even we during this test had problems guaranteeing that people will follow the path that we created. And sometimes they would go to a part of the city that would not have any ads. And, well, that was a problem for us. The data analysis was very problematic with the open nature of the city. And benchmarking, very difficult because every game is different and every experience is different. When you pair this with things that we know generally, it's not the in-game advertising that's really the biggest generator of profit. It's freemium mobile games that we need to pay to play. Pay smaller amounts. And this is also most of our partners that we work with deal with that sort of entertainment and not the classical big games you need to spend money up front to enjoy. Virtual worlds like Roblox are good because they create a closed environment in which you can control many more factors. And as an owner of Roblox, you can test things more easily and control them and monitor them. Instead of having 50 different games, you control everything. And esports is also, due to the repeatability and the sporting aspect, a good platform for in-game advertising. So to close it, what about Mark Zuckerberg's Metaverse idea? I think that Mark Zuckerberg basically wants to create his own virtual world, which is a game, essentially, or a set of games that exist in this bubble, and on top of that, there's his own currency, and there's all of these other functionalities. He just doesn't want to call it a computer game. Because the computer game, apparently, perhaps, is not a term that he wants to be associated with. He wants to control everything, just like on Facebook. He can control every ad, he can control every second of every player. In theory, in 10 years, you can have 100 games in there, strategy games, action games, Minecraft, whatever, and he can control every aspect, and he can inject ads, monitor how they perform, etc. Will it work? Again, we thought advertising in games 20 years ago was going to be something different than it turned out to be. We did not think about mobile games. We did not see what a huge business they will become. And that took everybody by surprise. Mark's idea is planned for the next 10 years, and who knows what other forms of entertainment will be dominant in the 10 years. It's a gamble, but I think this is what his idea for the Metaverse is. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share those findings with you. It was a fun project for us. It was a very revealing project to see how those ads work in a game. We also found that not many studies like these have been done before because they are quite challenging. So we are now fairly adept at them. I think we're ready to perform more of these type of studies because the challenges that are there, we already know what they are, and we are already working on other research initiatives in the gaming world. I will hopefully be able to share with you in the future. Thank you very much.